Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining me today. It's Allan Laboucan with the Rocks and Stocks News Show, and I've got another of my interviews with executives of junior mining companies. One of the things that I'm very bullish on is copper. You can see the electric car revolution, and people, I think, understand that that's going to need a lot of copper. But what I don't think is as well understood is how much copper is going to be needed in order to power those electric vehicles. In the United States, you've got a very ancient power grid that needs rewiring. You got the demands coming from the developing countries as they need more copper. And in Giulio Bonifacio, we've got a long-term copper bull that I've known for many years, and I'm happy to have him on the show. He's the executive chairman of Candente. And thanks for joining us, Giulio.
Well, Allan, thank you very much for having us today. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss Candente Copper, soon to be called Alta Copper Corp, and that'll take effect prior to the end of the month. And we're making some very, very good gains as we advance the project.
And from a base of having a tier one asset in the copper space, that the mining industry needs more copper, and the major mining companies are on the hunt for copper projects that top 10 in grade and in size.
That's exactly right. And in fact, when you look at projects of this size, and it's worth noting, Caniarco, it's already at 16.7 billion pounds of copper. That's the copper, gold, and silver, but 14 billion pounds of copper, 4 million ounces of gold, and about 90 million ounces of silver. I've been an investor in Candente for a long, long time. I've looked at the project, and I think the size of the asset, and also in terms of the ability to expand it further. It by comparisons only had 85,000 meters of drilling last drilled in 2013. So we definitely want to look at recommencing a drilling program by the end of the year. So we're making applications for a drill permit. And when you do a comparison of a lot of the other copper developers, 85,000 meters by comparison is very, very modest. And the two previous companies I was involved with stepped away from Nevada Copper after 12 years, retired, took that one from what was a market cap of 20 million to 600 million. Of course, that came back down when copper prices did what they did, and then a group came in at plus 50%. And they've had, since I've left, some challenges, but nonetheless permitted the project, understand process, and then stepped into another company because retirement was pretty short-lived, and stepped into a company called Copper Bank, acquired an asset called Copper Creek, which is now sitting in a renamed company called Faraday. Was able to bring in an exceptional group, and they've just done a fantastic job. And they just recently came out with their PEA, and I'm a rather large shareholder of that one as well. But in the background, as you said, Copper Bull, I like copper and have been a shareholder of Candente for a period of time, and I continue to accumulate a position. I think it's just a fantastic opportunity, and we're starting to see how that puts us in a good position relative to the size of the asset and the economics. So we can speak about that further, Allan, but maybe back to you with any specific questions you have on our plans and what we're intending to do here.
Well, first of all, a thank you is in order, because I was an early bull on your copper company when they were around a 20 million valuation, and Nevada Copper, and I've seen you take that from a junior into a producer. It looks like Faraday Copper is going to follow that same path, and then you've got Candente now, and I just can't get away from that top 10 undeveloped copper mine or potential mine, and not just in size but also in grade. And those are the exact same things that major mining companies are looking for, the kind of assets they need to own.
I mean, exactly. And when you look at the grade on this open pit, you look at the strip ratio, excuse me, at 0.66 to 1. You look at the ability on this asset to produce north of 250, 350 million pounds of copper per annum, depending on what throughput rates we use. The recently published PEA that we put out last year was a staged build going from 40,000 to 80,000 tons per day, started at a lower capex of $1 billion and self-funded to further expansion. And that got to annual production of about 90,000 tons of copper per annum, close to 200 million pounds. That's significant. But if you look back at the previous PFS that was done, the body of work on this company has been fantastic. Joanne Freese's involvement, who I work very closely with, but also Sean Waller, former senior vice president at AMEC, and he oversaw the previous PFS that operated at about 100,000 tons per day, but that produced north of 300 million pounds of copper per annum. Those type of projects move the needle for some of the majors, and the rhetoric on Candente, and it is worth talking about here briefly. People speak to the arsenic. Well, we've dealt with that in the PFS. We've dealt with it in the PEA. One of the secondary deposits, we've only drilled 15 holes into it, called Sur, Candente Sur. It's already sitting on about 2.3 billion pounds of copper. It carries no arsenic. And so from a commingle perspective, sure, we're going to see some penalties from the smelters, but it's very manageable, and the life of mine arsenic content's a little bit less than 1%. And so, as we bring on Sur, as we do more drilling, expand the resource, it truly could potentially be a generational resource, and of considerable size. And it's already sitting at 1.5 billion tons. So, when you look at it, compare it to our peer group, we're trading at a deep discount. We do think that's going to change. We really wanted to work out the scenario with Fortescue. We've got a big shareholder in Fortescue Metals, $60 billion market cap. They own 25%. That's not a blocking interest, but they're very supportive. And they simply wanted us to, make some changes at the board level, which I intended to do. I didn't step in as non-exec chairman till last June, and spent a number of months with them, working alongside with them and saying, hey, these are some things that we want to do as a company. We want to, re-engage with the community, but we need capital. And so we were able to close the financing with them in January at then 25% premium to market. It gave us enough capital to advance both the community discussions appropriately, demonstrate to them how they can benefit. Secondly, re-engage and activate our drill permits. And that previous comment, 85,000 meters hasn't been drilled since 2013. The drilling benefits us in terms of what it potentially represents, and there's considerable upside. Anyone that looks at this appreciates that, including the Fortescues of the world. But it also employs the community. So, from a community perspective, they have to understand it. They are stakeholders in this, both with respects to employment and the relationships that Joanne Freese has forged over the last 20 years, very notable. I mean, it's more about, hey, the relationships exist, but how do we work alongside and demonstrate to the community that we can, allow them to benefit. And when you spend time in County Arco and Canarsis, where this project's located in northern Peru, it's a very impoverished area. And so that, they understand completely that if done responsibly, they will benefit. And of course, we're going to do this in a very environmentally responsible fashion. And so that's why in the last PA that we put out, we didn't look at a roaster. We looked at commingling as another scenario. And so there's just good opportunity. But Whittle Consulting is another group that stepped in by way of an equity financing at 18 cents, which was a premium to 25%. Now, Whittle Consulting, they're going to work alongside of Ausenco to come out with what will be, in our view, a major catalyst in the next 3 to 5 months. It will be an optimized PEA that maybe looks at a slightly different model that looks at, hey, how much copper can this produce? We've got the one that's staged that generates a good profile, NPV of 1.4 billion on a capex of $1 billion, capital intensity very attractive. However, the leverage on this asset is so much greater if you look at higher throughput. We have soft rock, so we can process with one SAG mill and 2 ball mills and process up to 110,000 tons per day. That'll produce a production profile that exceeds 200 million pounds of copper per year and closer to 350 million pounds of copper per annum. That'll drive the model and change the economics. And so, when a Whittle Consulting comes in with their vast experience, I mean, they did work on Lazul. They took an equity stake in that company, I believe, based on discussions that we've had. That has turned out exceptionally well for McEwen Mining, as you'd expect. That's a big asset, big system in Argentina. But County Arco is equally a large system at close to 17 billion pounds, and that doesn't even factor in some of the upside opportunity. And there's just glaring targets. And so when you look at some of the past drilling, you had drill holes at, at 500 meters bottom of mineralization. You didn't look at some of the higher grade breccias contained within the Norte deposit. Also, I would add, most of the Norte deposit is in the M&I category. Close to 82% of it is in the measured and indicated category. And that in itself also allows us to start the clock on permitting. If we choose, carry on with the drilling, carry on with the community, forge the social license and put that in place with a community agreement, hopefully sometime this year. But also look at how we can continue to advance the permitting timeline. And so we could start in on a feasibility study if we choose in 2024 to start the clock, but that doesn't take away from how much more tonnage can we add to this. And there is, on our PowerPoint presentation, and we will, as part of
before you switch to that, you brought up some important things that I wanted to talk about.
Sorry, Allan, I just get so excited about this.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. I just let you run there.
Yeah, well, you can step in anytime. My apologies.
But I want to go back. You started out by talking about your peers. Now that's in the copper space, but then you also have peers in the other metals. So as a broader audience. And the two things that stand out to me is that when it comes to copper projects and copper companies, I'm always on the hunt for them, Julio. I'm very bullish on copper. But what I have a very hard time doing is finding a lot of good copper stories to talk about, which I think, is a very bullish argument for the metal itself, because I think that's indicative of the problems on the supply side. But then you also have your peers in the other metals, and you look at the valuations of them and the opportunities. To find something in the copper space is not easy, and the industry needs them so badly.
Well, I mean, that in itself is one of the key points, because if you look at the EV thematic and decarbonization, lithium's obviously had a good run here in our space as well, but there's just not enough high quality copper assets of size. And when you look at, back to Candente, soon to be called Alta Copper Corp, to replicate the body of work, the studies, the resource, and the opportunity would probably cost you. And I've thrown a number out there, but you could argue that it's higher or lower, but not lower, in my estimation, close to $150 million US, just
Easily.
Just to get us to a baseline. The other thing too is that in this next cycle, and there is a cycle in place that's forging here, the baseline that we have, when we come out with that updated, optimized PEA, that's going to be a great platform for us to do the things that we can do and leverage interest from some of the majors. And we've already got a very significant major that publicly has come out and said that they want to focus in on the electrification thematic and decarbonization. And so here we have a Fortescue, and instead of people appreciating what that represents, they don't seem to. But for us as a company, it's about valuation and how do we do what's in the best interest of all stakeholders. But I agree with you completely, Allan. Like, there hasn't been many. And one of the questions I got, and it is worth mentioning on one of these conference calls I was on a while back, is why hasn't the company been acquired? Well, if you follow the space closely, and I've been in it since 2005, and frankly done rather well on both those ventures that I was previously involved with, there hasn't been as much activity on the M&A front in this current cycle. That is going to change. You can tell by the amount of interest on an incoming basis that we get and other copper developers do as well. And so if you have a project that's got critical mass and size to it. Now, of course, people look at Peru and they have their concerns, but Peru is the second largest copper producer in the world. They appreciate that they really need this from a GDP perspective, right? They're going to facilitate certain projects, and as long as we do it appropriately with the community, I find some of the rhetoric on that to be grossly overstated.
I think what a lot of people lose sight of, Julio, is copper supply doesn't really care about countries or jurisdictions. Or the bottom line is we are in drastic need of more copper assets that need to be developed into mines to supply that demand that's coming from the electric vehicle revolution. And you touched on something there that I think is quite important. There's a lot of major mining companies that see that that's the reality of the future. But the menu of projects that they get to look at is very small. And to have one of those assets is quite exceptional. And that's what you guys do. And I go back to what I said earlier, top 10 in size, top 10 in grade, undeveloped mine.
Agreed. And I think potentially you'll see that we arguably can move up in that rating because, by comparison, Nevada Copper, 400,000 meters drilling, County Arco, 85,000 meters. If you look at all the different comps and companies, you'll find that many of them have 2 to 3 to 4 times the amount of drill footage in their project. And so, the strategy early on was because of the success by way of drill bit, and that's credit to Joanne Fries and team to systematically develop Norte the way they did. But, their intent was to move to feasibility, PFS. They did that in 11. And so, but there is just a really good opportunity to sort of focus in on what we know we can do well as a company, re-engage with the community appropriately, move forward with drilling, come up with a set of economics that truly reflect what the project will look like. And the understanding is that, projects of this size typically don't get built by juniors. And so I'm not saying that, we're going to rush to sell it at a discounted price, but I think that's arguably what we want to focus in on, our 3 competencies, advance the community side of the equation. Drilling helps us with both aspects of that because it creates employment, and then also put forth a set of economics that more appropriately reflects what this project can look like. So you've got the smaller bookend, if you will. It's, even though it's not small at 40,000 going to 80,000, and what production profile that gives forth and the economics, but then now show what a potentially slightly larger scenario might represent. But yeah, I think that we're in a fantastic position as we move forward, and also get in front of the audience, investors like yourself that follow the space, that appreciate that there's only so many of these out there. So, why does company X trade at 5 times our market cap, yet our project is more attractive, both economically as well as from a resource perspective? And get past Peru, because Peru in South America, regardless of where you're located, Argentina, Chile, obviously having some constitutional changes there. You look at Ecuador, you look at all sorts of locations south of North America, and you're like, they all have specific individual challenges, but that doesn't differ from even permitting a project in the American Southwest. And bearing in mind that,
or Canada, or
well, that's
Mexico.
exactly right. I mean, people, when I looked at permitting Pumpkin Hollow, balked and said, I don't think you can do it. And I said, well, yes, I think we can. We're going to approach it in a certain way. And, it is a very large project that was permitted. Now, operationally, I still think they get on the right side of that, because it is a big enough system and it's fully permitted. And there's been a big investment made by the incoming group and some of the other royalty companies or streaming companies that stepped into it. But, you're dealing with stakeholders. They're just different, dealing in our case with slightly different stakeholders. But when we look at who we have on our board, there's only the one Fortescue nominee, very supportive. Miguel Inchowski used to be the former mines minister of Peru, so he helps us with the strategy and the plan going forward. We've added people to the team appropriately. We've opened community offices, and so that's an evolving kind of process. But to simply look at Candente and say, oh, they've got community in arsenic, that frankly is silly.
Well, Julio, it amazes me, but I always telling people to do their homework. And it really surprises me sometimes that applies even to the big institutions out there. I think sometimes they get on a list of why you can't do something, and they don't sort of see how that evolves and do their homework. And they're not doing their homework on Candente or the new name of the company.
Yeah, and then the intent of me getting more involved too is to get in front of different groups and present it appropriately. And I think the body of work and Mother Nature at the end of the day and the project is what drives value. I mean, I've always been of that view. And of course, there's some teams out there that are exceptional. Like, for example, the team that stepped into Faraday, that was an easy decision for me to make. But that gave me bandwidth to broaden my exposure in the copper space and, focus in on a project like this that, if presented appropriately and with information that is supporting the resulting conclusions, that PEA that we put out, I think it's going to be, it's going to be fantastic based on what we've seen, and sure there's work to be done. When I say fantastic, I mean, again, large system, great profile, great margin. And I said I was an investor in Candente a long time back. I accumulated a lot from 2016 onward, more so, but anyone can look at my insider trading reports. But I guess the point there was, when I was running Nevada Copper, and I picked up that asset for a modest cost in 04 and took it live and took it public and it did all the things I needed to do, raised a substantial amount of money, started the construction, got it permitted, sunk a production size shaft. I do understand that part of the business. I think the most enjoyable part of the business is where we're at with Candente, though, in terms of what we're proposing to do by way of the economics and the drilling. And so when you sit back and you look at it, you're like, oh gosh, there's just a real good opportunity for us to continue to move this forward and create a more appropriate understanding of the asset and also all the moving parts and all these projects to close off. They're all individual. There's different variables that you have to consider, from where we're located, what some of the challenges are operationally, but you look at the existing infrastructure, you look at the port facilities, it does tick a lot of the right boxes, and part and parcel of our job is to mitigate whatever fatal flaws we see, and we don't see any, and move it forward appropriately. So I think you'll see that evolve here over the next 12 to 18 months.
Well, I'm really excited to be part of that process, Julio, because as I said before, I can't find enough good copper stories, and you've got a real gem of an asset in Joey Freeze there. She had fantastic, she was a QP geologist for Arequipa, ended up becoming a big mine that created a lot of jobs. She's been the champion in Peru for Candente and the Canariaco project. She's got a team there that, the ex-mining minister. And so, if that is a big knock against if the country's a big knock, or the potential to develop in the country is a big knock, you guys are approaching this from all the right angles to have a re-rating of the company based on, getting the story out there and telling people about the details of it. And I love that part of the game, Julio.
And yeah, very, very, thank you, Allan. Very, very much worth highlighting that, over a 20-year period, Joanne Freeze has done a very good job advancing the project. And, what we're doing now is entering a new phase and if you will, the next chapter of the company and into a cycle that, you talk about copper supply, you can talk about decarbonization and EV thematic, but also talk about declining grade profile, look at what's going on worldwide. Even without the EV thematic, copper was primed to move into a higher price range. And so, I think the price that we're currently at, as senior executives, one isn't put in a position to predict what commodity prices trade at, but I think we're in a very good range, and I think there's some further opportunity. And even when you look at the PEA, which is a sort of the stage build and lower capex, and you look at the numbers, at $5 copper, the NPV on an after-tax basis goes to about $2.3 billion. That's significant on a relative.
You only have a $50 million valuation right now,
which is modest. And historically, the company's had a valuation of close to 200 million, I believe, 250 in the last cycle.
right?
And now it's really, and as you can see by way of the trading, I think there's good interest. But anything like this that goes through a change like this, you're going to have some selling take place. So I think you look at the share price chart, it's moving sideways, which is a good thing. That means it's going to likely gap higher.
Well, for me, the big thing is also I'm always looking at takeout valuations over time. And right now you guys are trading at a fraction of a penny for the copper you have in the ground. And in a good market, at a PEA level, you're looking at 5 cents a pound in a takeover. So I think there's a lot of room between those two numbers. And as people get more excited about copper stories, that's when you see those better valuations relative to what you have in the ground.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, I would ask the audience to get a chance to look at one of our slides, and it's just a bit of a snapshot. It's not how you should value these things completely, but you should look at your NPVs, your IRRs, capital intensity. But from a penny per pound perspective, if you look at the last cycle, it was anywhere from 5 cents to 10 cents. Currently, everything has come off in a big way, but even on a comp basis, we trade at less than a third penny a pound. Some of our other companies that are on this list trade at 4, 5, 6 times that, and that's based on a discounted price.
And even they're undervalued. So you're
actually, without a doubt, and what I've noticed as well, and again, I pay a lot of attention to the space like you do, is that the drill bit on some of these projects that have come out with some good drilling results that have, albeit deeper drill holes. I mean, their share valuations have skyrocketed. They've hit some valuations, demonstrate that there's generational opportunity.
You mentioned Los Azules, and that hadn't been drilled for a long time as well, and now they're getting back in there, and even the infill drilling is getting people excited. So yeah, on the value of what you have in the ground, you guys have a top 10 asset in size and grade, and you're one of the lowest valuations on pennies per pound in the ground relative to the size of that asset. So I'm very excited about the opportunity, and they say you're supposed to buy low so you can buy. The buy low is the important part.
It is, and I think that you'll see the valuation or that disparity. I think that gap will narrow in the coming months, and part of it's getting out there and presenting what we're looking at doing, and it will be well received. And folks, truly should appreciate why Whittle Consulting stepped in on equity and why Fortescue has accumulated the position, but appreciate as well that their interest is not a blocking interest, and so that doesn't preclude our ability to do other transactions if they're appropriate. But at the end of the day, nurturing those relationships with groups like that and others is really part and parcel of what we're hoping to do here. And I think we can actually have success with that based on, as I said, the project and the merits of the project, because that's always what drives the equation. It always does. That will never change. You
got anything to close on, Julio, or did we cover most of it?
I think we covered it, and as you can see, I get pretty excited about it because I do like the copper space, and I've been in it for a long time, and I'm very, very impressed with having the ability. Joey asked me to step in a more active way last June, and had to spend a few months with our big shareholder, and that turned out nicely. And now we're into the next phase of the company's development, and so yeah, thank you so much for your previous support of the company, and also taking the time today to talk to us. I really do appreciate it.
Well, in Candente and the new company name and the new structure of the shares, I think the shareholders are well positioned to have you and Joey working as a team.
Thank you. I have one other comment, and it did come up, and I think it's been well enough received. But historically, when companies do share consolidations, they don't have projects like we do, and so my view from the outset was whether you own 4 shares or 1 share, that doesn't change anything. 50 million market cap. This is really more about putting ourselves in a better position to take advantage of a slightly different audience in the group. And so maybe close off on that. And again, thank you, Allan, for taking the time today.
Awesome. Let me close it out and we can have a chat at the other end.
Sounds
good. There you go, folks. Julio, he touched on a lot of the great aspects of the company, but what it really comes down to for me is that bottom line valuation. You've got a company here that ranks in the top 10 of undeveloped projects in grade and size, and then they're trading for a fraction of a penny on the asset of the copper in the ground. And in a good market, even in the now market, companies are trading at significant multiples of that for the valuation of the copper in the ground. And in a good market for copper, you would be looking at several multiples. Not only is it difficult for me to find good copper stories to talk about, it's also very exciting to find them when they're at these low valuations. Because as I said, the trick in this business is to find things that are undervalued and buy low so you can sell high. And I think that this is a good one for you to do your homework on. And I'm going to keep telling this story as we go forward. And I'll have Julia on in future interviews as well. And as always, speak with your financial advisor. My shows are for information purposes only. And go to their website and check out. The company has a lot of great details, the corporate presentation, the news releases, and do your homework. I don't think a lot of people have done their good homework on Candente, and I think that creates a great opportunity for investors. On that note, have a great day, and we will talk to you soon.